a number of distinguished panelists with us, and I hope this will be a very fruitful and frank discussion around this topic, which is important and timely against the background of the perfect storm of crisis, and we will jump into that. But before we do, I have a few points of clarification, housekeeping rules. The first is that this event is translated, so we have a live interpretation in French and in English. So for those of you who want to listen in or speak in French, you have at the bottom left of your screen a globe icon where you can choose the channel. Pour ceux et celles qui voudraient suivre la discussion en français, on a une interprétation en direct et vous pouvez donc choisir la langue d'écoute de votre au bas de votre écran, vous pouvez choisir la chaîne français ou anglais. Donc voilà, c'est la première chose pour que tout le monde puisse comprendre. The second point is that this will be a recorded event, so please take that into consideration. We would welcome, and these are basic, I think, ground rules that everyone by now understands and is quite used to in terms of how to go about this event. First, please do turn off your microphones. So that goes for our distinguished panelists, but also for the audience. So we have a clear sound, including for our interpreter with us. I would also ask you, and especially again for our panelists, to keep your camera on if that is possible, so that we don't have the impression of speaking to a blank screen. We will have a chat function to give you the possibility, those of you who are listening in, to comment and or ask questions during the event. I have my colleagues here, Katia and San, with whom we have worked closely on this file, and I'll say a few words later on this. But Katia will be monitoring the chat, so please do not hesitate already during the panel discussion to come in with your questions, comments, and then we will have a Q&A session where we can go back to those questions, including by giving the floor to some of you to ask some questions. I think this will be the main housekeeping rules. I will then maybe just say a few words of introduction before I give the floor to our speakers. I said this is a very timely and important topic, cooperation and support to LDCs in the wake of the global COVID-19 pandemic, the war in Ukraine, which are having and will have long-lasting consequences all over the world, but more specifically in the most fragile, the poorest, and most vulnerable countries, and in particular in LDCs. And I think due to their indeed multiple and overlapping vulnerabilities, the limited resources that LDCs have to face the consequences of the crisis, and also to address the numerous challenges in terms of sustainable development, there's a real need now more than ever. And this sense of urgency, I think, is really important to recall today. They are in need of enhanced and strengthened support, commitment from the international community at large, from the EU specifically, when it comes to supporting their development. So I think this sense of urgency today is important given the context we are in. And this, I think this sense of urgency has been reiterated in recent weeks, recent months, with the adoption of the Doha Program of Action for Least Developed Countries for the decade 2022-2031, which also clearly took this into account and sought to renew the commitment the support in partnership with the LDCs to address the numerous challenges that they are facing. And at the EU level as well, development ministers a few days ago actually also adopted a set of council conclusions on renewing the EU's partnership with least developed countries. And the common threads in this is really this sense of urgency, the need to not only renew and recommit, but to enhance the support, find new ways of working, innovative approaches. So this is really the topic that I would like us to discuss today, discussing on how the EU in particular can and should renew its cooperation, its approach, its partnership with LDCs. And I said that we have with us today a very rich, diverse panel with different perspectives, and I would really, given the scope of the topic we are discussing today, hope that the different perspectives are brought into the discussion, to the table, and have a stimulating question on a topic which might seem a bit redundant. It's not new, but yet there is this sense of urgency. And before we begin the panel discussion per se, I would like to give the floor, because this topic has actually been brought and carried by the French presidency of the Council of the EU at the EU level. So I would maybe start by asking our speaker, Luc Chevaillier, from the French Ministry. Luc Chevaillier, vous êtes sous-directeur, adjoint sous-directeur du développement au ministère des Affaires étrangères en France. Et j'aimerais vous demander si vous pouviez nous expliquer la raison pour laquelle la France, la présidence française du Conseil, a voulu porter haut et fort ce dossier, cette thématique d'un renouveau du partenariat de l'UE, de l'Union européenne, avec les pays les moins avancés.
Merci beaucoup, Alexei. Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Tout d'abord, pour dire qu'on est en train de se battre avec, avec nos tablettes pour faire fonctionner cette vidéo. Je regrette beaucoup, ça ne fonctionne pas pour l'instant. Voilà, on en a notre deuxième tablette, donc toute transparence, on fait tous les efforts possibles, mais ça ne fonctionne toujours pas à ce stade. On va continuer à essayer, et pardon parce que c'est pas agréable effectivement pour vous de voir un écran effectivement qui est blanc ou noir. Je voulais vous remercier d'abord de me permettre de m'exprimer en français. C'est effectivement une présidence française du Conseil de l'Union européenne, et on attache beaucoup de prix à la possibilité de pouvoir nous exprimer dans notre langue. Ensuite, saluer Madame l'ambassadrice de la Gambie auprès de l'Union européenne, ainsi que les autres panélistes de la Commission européenne, la DG INTPA ou de la délégation de l'Union européenne à New York, ainsi que les représentants du Fonds d'équipement des Nations Unies et de l'ONG Cordaid, et puis évidemment les équipes de l'ECDPM et vous-même, Alexei Jones. Un grand merci pour avoir organisé cette réunion. Alors évidemment, on aurait souhaité pouvoir tous être présents, mais c'est déjà important qu'on puisse échanger dans ce format par visioconférence. Merci aussi au public qui s'est connecté et qui nous accompagne aujourd'hui. Alors, je vais pas redire ce que vous avez déjà dit très bien, Alexei Jones, dans vos propos introductifs, l'enchaînement de crises qui affecte effectivement tous les pays, mais en particulier les plus vulnérables, les pays les moins avancés. On peut considérer, voilà, avec beaucoup d'angoisse en fait, toutes les conséquences de la crise liée à la pandémie de Covid-19, et puis désormais les risques d'insécurité alimentaire, les risques liés à la hausse des prix de l'énergie en raison de la guerre en Ukraine, et puis voilà, toutes les conséquences que ça peut engendrer sur le plan social et politique. Les progrès fragiles qui avaient été réalisés par les pays les moins avancés, les PMA, vers la réalisation des objectifs de développement durable et de l'agenda 2030 sont d'ores et déjà probablement en partie remis en cause. Et donc, je dirais que la raison pour laquelle nous avons souhaité, dans le cadre de la présidence française de l'Union européenne, mettre un accent particulier sur la nécessaire, le renouvellement du partenariat avec les PMA pour l'Union européenne, il découle de cette actualité. Et, et, euh, et donc, pour nous, il est essentiel que les flux d'aide publique au développement soient réorientés en priorité vers cette catégorie de pays dont la pertinence est renforcée dans ce contexte. Je dirais un mot peut-être. Vous le savez, la France vraiment a des positions traditionnelles très fortes en faveur des PMA et on a une nouvelle loi qui a été promulguée le 4 août dernier, la loi de programmation relative au développement solidaire et à la lutte contre les inégalités mondiales. Cette loi acte la concentration de notre aide publique au développement en dons en faveur de 19 pays parmi les moins avancés, dont 18 sont situés en Afrique subsaharienne et Haïti également. Je dirais aussi d'ailleurs que nous avons pour ambition d'accroître aussi notre trajectoire en matière d'APD pour atteindre l'objectif très symbolique de 0,7% du RNB d'ici 2025. Et si on maintenant on parle, même si j'entrerai pas dans les détails à ce stade, on pourra y revenir dans les questions, mais on parle davantage de ces conclusions. Effectivement, pour nous, ça a été un moment fort, hein, le Conseil Affaires étrangères, segment développement de vendredi dernier, 20 mai, les conclusions relatives au renouvellement du partenariat avec les PMA ont été adoptées à cette occasion. Je pourrais dire en résumé qu'effectivement, on avait un double objectif. D'abord, celui de capitaliser sur une dynamique internationale favorable. Effectivement, Alexei, vous avez rappelé euh, l'adoption à New York en mars dernier du 5e programme d'action des Nations Unies pour les PMA, qui est un jalon important vers l'atteinte des objectifs de développement durable dans ces pays. Et donc, on se fixe aussi hein, comme perspective la conférence de Doha en mars 2023 au niveau des chefs d'État. Euh, et donc, à cet égard, il était important que l'Union européenne et les États membres jouent un rôle moteur pour l'obtention d'un texte qui soit aussi ambitieux que cohérent. Et on peut dire que ces conclusions, en tout cas, c'est ce qu'on avait souhaité, et c'est une sorte de première pierre, en fait, hein, pour matérialiser notre plein engagement à mettre en œuvre cet agenda. Donc ça, c'est le premier objectif. Et puis ensuite, je l'ai esquissé, mais effectivement, l'importance de démontrer la pertinence de la catégorie des PMA et de réaffirmer la validité du traitement préférentiel dont ils bénéficient, dans une double logique de solidarité euh, et d'efficacité. Euh, donc à cet égard, euh, je, je dirais que évidemment, il ne s'agit pas d'opposer, par exemple, les pays à revenus intermédiaires et les PMA. Notre travail s'est inscrit, qui est un travail d'ailleurs collectif, s'est inscrit aussi dans la continuité des conclusions adoptées par la présidence portugaise euh, en- donc il y a un an, en mai 2021. Euh, Effectivement, on a besoin d'avoir une approche qui soit une approche donc, complémentaire. Et donc à cet égard, les 46 PMA doivent continuer de concentrer les principaux défis s'agissant de l'atteinte des ODD, qu'il s'agisse d'enjeux climatiques, de gouvernance ou d'enjeux financiers. Voilà, simplement pour ne pas être trop long, dire effectivement que ce travail, c'est le fruit d'un travail collectif, je le redis. Je remercie à cet égard les équipes de l'ECDPM, dont les travaux ont inspiré le premier jeu de conclusion hein, que la France avait proposé. Je remercie aussi tous les États membres et la Commission européenne, ainsi que le SEAE, qui donc, ont pu permettre d'enrichir aussi ce texte. Et puis enfin, un grand merci aux chercheurs de la FERDI et de l'IDRI qui ont pu aussi contribuer à ces travaux. Je ne voudrais pas être plus long, et donc peut-être, Alexei, je vous rends la parole. Merci encore.
Merci beaucoup, Luc, merci pour cette introduction et vraiment la présentation de l'importance de cette thématique et la nécessité de renouveler l'engagement. Et j'ai bien noté qu'il s'agissait alors ici de ces conclusions d'une première pierre et qu'il faut continuer dans cette dynamique et sans doute être un peu plus concret. Et c'est précisément l'objectif visé aussi par cette discussion aujourd'hui, de voir comment, quelles sont les mesures que l'Union européenne peut prendre pour renforcer ce partenariat et le rendre plus efficace vis-à-vis des PMA. Vous avez aussi mentionné les travaux qu'on a faits. Je prendrai juste quelques minutes pour présenter un peu quelques messages de notre papier qui est aussi donc, à alimenter un petit peu les discussions en vue des conclusions. But before I do that, presenting some of our key messages, I would just like to introduce our distinguished panelists who will share their views, experience, and perspectives on how the EU could strengthen its cooperation and partnership with LDCs. We have with us Ambassador Teneng Jaiteh, Ambassador of the Gambia to the EU and also to several EU member states, if I'm not mistaken. So we'll be very keen to hear from you on what might be expected from the EU in particular when it comes to supporting LDCs in reaching the SDGs, but also in facing the immediate consequences of the succession of the perfect storm of crisis that the world is facing. On a aussi Philippe Latriche. Philippe Latriche, you are advisor on SDGs and inequalities at DG INTPA, the European Commission. And we'll be very keen to hear from you precisely on what might be the follow-up to the Council conclusions that were just adopted and how the EU can make best use of its brand new financial instrument and a Team Europe approach in order precisely to move towards this strengthened and renewed partnership with LDCs. With us today, we also have Izabella Toth from Cordaid. You have a long experience in working with this organization, where you currently are Director for Fundraising and Relations with Donors. So we'll be also very keen to hear from you what, from the civil society perspective, the EU should do maybe differently, do more, do less when it comes to strengthening its partnership with LDCs. We have also with us Laura Senett. You are a policy specialist at the UN Capital Development Fund, and you have worked a lot on development finance, blended finance. And we'll be very keen also to hear from you on your insights and perhaps recommendations for the EU based on your experience, your work at the UN level, what the EU could do more and better when it comes to mobilizing development finance for LDCs. And we also have with us Tiina Satuli. You are Counsellor at the EU Delegation in New York, and prior to that you were also at the Delegation in Geneva working with the WTO. So you've been directly involved also in the negotiations of the adoption or preparing the adoption of the Doha Programme of Action at the UN. And I think from our side, it'd be very interesting to also hear what you think the EU could do differently, better when it comes to cooperating with the broader international community, with the UN in particular, because this is also something that goes way beyond the EU. The Doha Programme of Action is a global agenda as well for LDCs. So we'd like to also to hear from you on how the EU can work better with the international community and the UN from your perspective. So this is for the introduction. We do have a very rich panel, and given again the broad topic we are discussing today, we really look forward to those different perspectives brought into the discussion. Before we do that, I will just present very briefly some of the key points, because I think this is also a good way to start, and also to ask for your reactions and comments on some of our recommendations that we have put forward in our paper. As Luc Chevaillier has said, we produced this in the context of our collaboration with the French presidency, and we worked on the paper on EU cooperation with LDCs. And maybe a few points that came out from our analysis. The first one is actually that based on our analysis, we do not see the need for a dedicated EU policy for LDCs per se. The EU indeed has at its disposal a wide range of policy commitments, approaches, a brand new instrument, a differentiated approach, which should allow the EU to take fully into account the specific needs, capacities of poor, fragile, and vulnerable countries. So I think there's no real need for a dedicated policy on LDCs by the EU. Yet there is a need for greater coherence and more tailored approach and cooperation with LDCs. I think this is one of the key messages, is there's still room for improvement in terms of coherence, consistency, alignment, and this more tailored approach that really caters for the needs, the specificities, the multiple vulnerabilities of LDCs. And I think this opportunity now that the EU has with its new instrument, this more integrated, policy-driven instrument, is indeed a good opportunity to upscale its approach towards LDCs. In our paper, we have looked at, obviously not the whole picture of what the EU could do vis-à-vis LDCs, but first and foremost looked at what the EU could do in the area of development cooperation and development finance. And there are indeed a number of specific measures that can be either taken or strengthened in those areas. But more broadly, and that's the second, I think, big message, is that the EU support and partnership with LDCs really needs to go beyond development cooperation, development finance. There's really a need to look at the bigger picture and look at also the impact of other crucial policy domains, EU policy domains, have on LDCs. In our paper, we looked at more specifically trade and climate, which have a direct impact and vital impact for LDCs. And if you allow me, I will just share very quickly, just one slide. I will not bore you more than that. Some of the main recommendations that we have in those respective areas. So first, in the area of development cooperation, I think the start is indeed to make sure that the ODA commitments vis-à-vis LDCs that the EU and the member states have taken are honored. We know that the EU lags behind in that respect. And this is even more important nowadays, given the impact of the COVID and now the war in Ukraine, which will again have most likely long-lasting impacts in developing countries and LDCs in particular. The other aspect is really to place a stronger emphasis on human development and human development at large, so a really broad understanding of human development, particularly now focusing also on the nutrition and food security aspects, so the broad understanding of human development, which has been strengthened in recent years, but I think more can and should be done in that area. And also one aspect here is really have a better understanding, measurement, and really acting upon these multiple overlapping, and I would say synergetic vulnerabilities of LDCs. I think really it's looking at how they interact with each other and reinforce each other. That's also one point. In the area of development finance, there is a set of brand new approaches, instruments, EFSD Plus, focus on blended finance guarantees, which are supposedly all good, but not necessarily adapted to the situation, the context, the needs in LDC. So there's really a need to adapt those financial instruments, innovative financial instruments, to the specific needs and capacities of LDCs. And in that sense, need for broader technical assistance to make sure there are connections, synergies between those financial tools and the broader development cooperation approaches. So the policy and the technical assistance, policy dialogue, policy framework, and technical assistance should go hand in hand with those financial instruments. In the area of development finance, obviously, the looming debt crisis is also crucial to address in least developed countries. And trade and climate, again, these are not exhaustive measures, but indeed the need to go beyond the trade preferences that LDCs benefit from to ensure their effective market access to markets globally. And linked to that also the need to make sure that this graduation process out of the LDC category, which has its pros and cons, is done in a smooth manner and to accompany that graduation process. In the area of climate and food security, the two key points we would like to stress here is the need to strengthen and increase finance for climate adaptation, which is really lagging behind as well, and is a strong demand from least developed countries. And in the current context, and the stronger focus needed on building or rebuilding the capacity and the food security in LDCs to ensure that the food, water, climate nexus is addressed in that comprehensive approach. So this is really linked also to the, I would say, red threads in all these measures is perhaps the need to strengthen the EU's commitment to policy coherence, which in our view is also crucial and probably more crucial for LDCs. So with that, I will stop here. Thanks for bearing with me on these key messages. But I think also we would be very happy and keen to hear from you on how these measures are indeed taken up by the EU, realistic, and probably what more needs to be done. And I will open now the discussion by giving the floor to Ambassador Jaiteh. And please react to those points or the recent declarations or conclusions of the EU, maybe from your side, representing a least developed country in the current context. What do you expect? What are you waiting for? We're waiting from the EU and its member states in terms of support to LDCs.
Thank you very much, Alexei, and a very good afternoon to all my fellow panelists and also to the participants that are joining us online. I just want to use this opportunity to wish everybody a happy Africa Day, which is today, and to thank ECDPM and the French presidency for organizing this seminar to fall on this auspicious day, and for inviting us to participate in the discussion. And as you know, most African countries, a good number of LDCs are actually found in Africa. And this day particularly commemorates the hopes and aspirations of the founding fathers of independent Africa for the economic and social development of Africa and her people. And that even though a lot of progress has been made since those declarations in 1963, many of these aspirations and goals are still with us today. And as we still have lower income economies in Africa, and even those that have graduated from LDC status are still very vulnerable and very fragile. And coming back to your question, I would like to first of all thank you for the very good background information given to us. And we want to particularly thank the European Union for partnering with some of our countries and keeping on the forefront the special needs of LDCs, especially the LDCs that are found in the African continent. And if I may borrow from some of the points that you have raised yourself and Mr. Chevaillier, I was just taking notes, and I believe that the discussion could center around some of these points. And this is the issue of urgency. You know, there's very need to focus on the urgency of the specific needs of LDCs such as the Gambia. The need to make these things important as priority. We know that there are competing important issues we are grappling with. You know, the COVID-19 has affected all our economies. We are now also dealing with the war in Ukraine, which is affecting even the economies of our partners. So we want to make sure that these issues affecting LDCs are kept important and relevant. We also want to see the commitment and the solidarity of our development partners. And I'm glad that the French presidency and indeed the European Union is making these issues very important. Some of those would think that when there is greater focus on the immediate issues of the war and its impact on the economies in Europe, there will be a greater focus on looking at the impact on Europe and its neighbors rather than focusing on the LDCs, especially the African LDCs. So we are glad that the Council has come out with this paper to rededicate attention to LDCs. We know that the new INDIKI instrument is designed to focus resources and in a collaborative way to support the development agendas of some of our economies. And there's a lot of work in progress in that area. And coming back to the issue of a dedicated policy for LDCs, we believe that even within these instruments, the focus can be there because there are different instruments that are in place, both within the EU and also in other development areas or development international organizations. But it is important to focus and to be coherent and to align all the support mechanisms so that they'll have greater impact on some of our economies, looking at our special and differential needs, especially our high vulnerabilities and our low coping strategies. Already the war in Ukraine is having a very negative impact on food security. And I believe this is why the theme for this year's celebration of Africa Day is focused on strengthening resilience and food security on the African subcontinent. This is very key as even this morning there was this announcement in one of the media houses that some of the major exporters of food are hoarding their food crops. Now, some of our economies are net food importers. Again, the Gambia is a net food importer. If we have hoarding, then directly this affects food security in our continent, not only in terms of availability, but also in terms of cost. So therefore, some of these policies would have to be looked at in a manner in which you look at the specific needs of individual countries like ours and see how they impact, at the lowest level, both at the macro level and also at the micro level. Because even within the economies, within the countries, you can have differential impact on vulnerable groups, for example. So we are happy that the EU and the French presidency, partnering with ECDPM, is doing a lot of research in this area. But we do believe that this could also be anchored on our own national development priorities and provide us with the capacity building that we need, the capacity enhancement, focusing on human development, because a lot of us are still lagging behind in this area. The research capabilities to handle such impacts in our economies is still very low. I'm glad that you mentioned the issue of trade systems again. I've read through the documents and the ideas are very brilliant. But again, when it comes to some of the green-based policies as far as trade is concerned, some of us get a bit worried as to whether market access would not be compromised when some of these policies are put in place. So again, I believe that there is a need to have a lot of dialogue on policy coherence and deepening this dialogue to make sure that the impact on the desired impact is actually achieved rather than some of these having any negative consequences on what we're trying to achieve. I think I'll stop there for now and we can continue the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Jaiteh, for sharing your thoughts and stressing indeed the urgency again of the situation and probably what resonates here again is the need to take a broad look at the different ways through which LDCs are vulnerable and need to be supported in terms of their capabilities to face the crisis and also what the EU can do in other policy areas. At this stage, I would like to invite Philippe Latriche maybe to come in and comment maybe on what was said, but maybe more broadly also on what, from your perspective, building on the impulse and the momentum created now with these council conclusions, which require to be followed up operationally. What's from your perspective and your the organization you represent can be done differently and urgently.
Thank you, Alexei. Thanks for the floor. Good afternoon to everyone. Good morning to the colleagues in New York. Thank you to ECDPM for the initiative and the report and the background paper. And indeed, merci la présidence française. Thank you for the focus that the presidency really put in the last 6 months on LDCs. Indeed, with the adoption last Friday at the Foreign Affairs Council development segment of Council conclusions, very close collaboration with the presidency, with the other member states to achieve this very positive outcome. So full support from our side in the exercise, but also in taking this forward now. Alexei, maybe I would try to structure the message I'd like to share with everyone this afternoon around 4 key areas, trying also to reply to some of the comments you made and some of the questions you had sent us. First, quickly, because this was raised, but I think this is important to recall, while indeed the focus is on Ukraine, rightly so, we must not turn our back on partner countries and specifically on least developed countries. I think this is a key message, and I'm sure for those colleagues involved in discussions last week, whether in the framework of the Foreign Affairs Council meetings, whether in the framework of G7 discussions in the development era, you might have heard also several discussions taking place in the European Parliament last week, where Commissioner Urpilainen was very, very strong on sending such a message. More than ever, we need to stand with LDCs and support them in facing the consequences. No need for me to revert to it. This was raised by the ambassador and by the French presidency, notably in the area of food security, energy, and so forth, both in the short run, and maybe we'll come back to it, but also more systematically. But I think also importantly, not to forget, 3 months ago, before COVID, that we had also sat together and agreed together on key long-term strategic priorities that we should not forget. And I think this is the first message that you heard my commissioner pass very forthfully in the last couple of days, and that I wanted to reiterate. First message. That leads me to my second message and the question you had raised about why, and to some extent this is linked to the first point I made, why engaging with LDCs? Well, simply, I mean, in a more geopolitical world and de facto more geopolitics at play, as we see very concretely, I believe this is all the more important for us to actually hold course and for Europe to continue delivering on the European agenda, promoting interests and values, and to do so not for, but together with, in partnership with LDCs and other partners around the world. I think this is all the more important now for the EU, for Europe to be seen as a reliable, sustainable, principled partner that eventually is ready to engage with LDCs around the world for the benefit of people. And I believe that in this period of time, this is all the more important that we continue to hold course and push that agenda in partnership. I mean, this is not something we're doing for LDCs, this is something we're doing together with 46 LDCs in the world. And I think this is important. And as the ambassador was just saying before me, out of those 46 LDCs around the world, 33 are in sub-Saharan Africa. We're celebrating Africa Day today. We, as you know very well, I'll mention a few concrete examples, had recently the EU-AU summit taking place in Brussels. So this is why, geopolitically speaking, this is important to hold course and continue to partner based on those values that we share. And all the more important to do it today in the current broader context. Now, maybe the 2 other points on which I wanted to share a few messages, and again, this is not only the why as you had requested us to think about, and some of the comments that were made, but also concretely what and at what level. And I think the first, and this is Alexis, you alluded to it, and this is part of the ECDPM report, is what can we do first at political level? How can we keep LDCs in the policy picture, let's say? And the first point that was made both by the ambassador and yourself, and which fully share, is that we need to ensure coherence. We need to connect the dots across policy areas. And this is not something that falls on the mandate of my commissioner or this director general. This is something that de facto comes up every Wednesday when the Commission adopts proposals that sends to Council and Parliament. And in the areas that you've mentioned, whether climate, whether trade, whether biodiversity or food security and agriculture, I think there's a need for constant attention, and that's certainly something on which you've heard my commissioner, my director general, and we are promoting. And this is, again, a constant effort. This is not something as a one-off, but this is a regular ambition to make sure that when we do propose several policy proposals for Council and Parliament to endorse, that we take into consideration the interest of LDCs and also the impact of what we have in mind on LDCs, because the reality is that those policy proposals promoting a European agenda will only succeed if we can engage with the rest of the world, notably LDCs, in taking them forward. So I think that's a key element at policy level, and maybe the most important in terms of impact. At policy level, certainly more in our remit, as you know very well, through the new global gateway strategy, which we have adopted, we want clearly, and that's a clear message I want to pass today, to continue to give specific attention to LDCs. When rolling out global gateway, which is de facto our investment plan along the principal line I've just elaborated, to engage with the rest of the world to promote green and digital transition, this is obviously something for which we need to continue to make sure that we engage with LDCs when rolling out global gateway. Just to give you a very specific example. At policy level also, I think this is important to get, I was going to say, the most out of those important political policy moments that we have together with least developing countries. I mean, just to name a few recent ones, as I mentioned earlier, we had in February the important EU-AU summit. We also had the Indo-Pacific Forum that also concerned several LDCs in the region. Our objective is clearly, and that's what we try to reflect in the EU-AU summit in February, is really not only to engage in joint declarations, but really to use those opportunities at high political level to engage leaders very concretely in initiatives, in outcomes, in deliverables that speak also very directly to least developing countries. No need to go into the details, but as you know very well, in February, we also discussed, apart from the joint declaration, very, very concrete proposals around investing in young businesses in Africa, in promoting strategic corridors in West Africa, for example, where the ambassador knows very well the challenges, in fighting illicit financial flows. I mean, all also very concrete initiatives that I think we need to make sure that at policy level, together with LDCs, in those contexts, we can actually ensure and take forward. So that work at policy level is obviously something, and I will wrap on that point, on that third point, that we do. I mean, this is obviously something, as I say, we do with partners, with LDCs, not for them. This is part of our joint endeavor. And as you mentioned also, Alexei, I think earlier in some of the recommendations, this needs to be this way so that it's tailor-made. I mean, when we do speak in those country-specific contexts or region-specific contexts, this is where we can actually ensure that the concrete deliverables that we jointly discussed are tailored to the needs and the situation. This is something I wanted to raise. The French presidency, Luc Chevaillier raised it at the beginning, that we obviously don't do on our own. Not as a commission, but together with member states at large under a Team Europe approach. And more than this, as shown by the panel this afternoon, this is something that needs everybody's engagement. Financial institutions, I'll mention guarantee and investments in my fourth point, civil society organization, academics. I mean, we all, if you look at, for example, the way we're inviting you all to the EDDs in June, this is exactly this comprehensive approach that we need to capture. So, important that, and very operationally, that the LDC's perspective together with ours is discussed at that policy level. And then, and that's my fourth point, important on the what, that this is also translated in terms of implementation, in terms of tool. Alexei, you mentioned the ODA figures. Yes, there are ODA commitments to LDCs. Those need to be implemented, respected, and monitored. That's a given, and this needs to continue. As you mentioned also, we are equipped, at least at EU level, we are equipped with a specific instrument for the current financial perspective and the 6 years ahead, Global Europe and the ICI instrument, which was designed specifically with some clause looking at the needs of LDCs at the vulnerabilities. And this is something in the negotiation of the instrument together with member states, in its programming, again, jointly with member states, that we have taken forward. I mean, the reality is that not only on paper are specific clause in the instrument reflecting the vulnerability of LDCs, but we have translated this concretely into our programming. And going back to one of your recommendations and one of the points that the ambassador was making about this needing to be tailor-made, when you look concretely at our programming documents, our multi-annual indicative programs, or the annual ones that are coming along, those are the results of joint discussions. This is tailor-made in practice because this is the way we program our work together. And if I look also to give you a few concrete examples of how to translate in this policy objective in terms of tools, if I look, for example, at Team Europe initiatives, as you know very well, where we work together with member states, more than 40% of our TEIs, Team Europe initiatives, currently are taking place in LDCs. If I look at budget support, 47% or so of our ongoing budget support happens in LDCs. And as you mentioned, the EFSD Plus, and there is certainly an effort ongoing, also has specific provisions to make sure that we can favor direct working with IFIs, investment in LDCs. So not only a policy priority, but something that we really try to translate at implementation level. So those were the 4 messages I wanted to share with you. It makes geopolitical sense to work with LDCs, and certainly at policy level in terms of coherence, but then also very concretely translated into the instrument that we have at hand. Thank you, Alexei.
Thank you very much, Philippe. I see Luc Chevaillier, vous avez levé la main. Est-ce que c'est une réaction à ce que M. Latriche vient de dire?
Oui, tout à fait. Merci de me redonner la parole. Tout d'abord, j'espère que vous me voyez désormais.
Oui, c'est bon maintenant.
C'est d'accord, je ne vais pas vous dire ce qu'on a fait, je peux vous le dire en fait. On est sur un téléphone portable, donc c'est un peu artisanal, mais très heureux que vous désormais vous puissiez me voir. Et j'espère que vous m'entendez bien également. Alors, juste quelques mots en réaction, et je ne veux pas monopoliser la parole, mais effectivement, tout d'abord pour présenter également mes vœux à l'occasion de la Journée mondiale de l'Afrique. Évidemment, il n'y a pas que des PMA en Afrique, il y en a d'autres régions du monde, mais la France, en tout cas, fait de l'Afrique subsaharienne en particulier une très forte priorité politique. Je rappellerai évidemment que le sommet UE-UA a été organisé les 17 et 18 février dernier sous notre présidence, évidemment avec le soutien de Charles Michel et des institutions européennes. Et je pense qu'elle a permis de poursuivre une mobilisation pour le continent africain qui avait été enclenchée au sommet sur le financement des économies africaines de mai 2021. À cet égard, je crois que moi je remercie beaucoup Madame Teneng Memba Jaiteh, donc l'ambassadrice de la Gambie auprès de l'Union européenne, pour ses propos, le sentiment d'urgence à agir et à la nécessité d'avoir un impact dans nos actions. Et je rejoins aussi Philippe Latriche à l'instant sur l'idée que finalement il faut vraiment maintenant passer à la mise en œuvre parce que on a un nouvel instrument unique, le NDICI, un règlement très ambitieux, notamment pour les PMA. 3 années de négociation de ce règlement, 1 année et demie de programmation des initiatives Équipe Europe et donc d'une programmation classique du nouvel instrument. Je pense que désormais il faut rentrer dans le concret. À cet égard, Philippe Latriche a cité quelques secteurs clés dont vont bénéficier les pays les moins avancés, notamment en Afrique. On pourrait citer le domaine de la santé qui évidemment après la pandémie est une priorité majeure avec l'initiative Équipe Europe MAV+, en soutien à la production locale de vaccins et de médicaments, ou l'initiative Équipe Europe One Health pour le renforcement des systèmes de santé. La sécurité alimentaire avec l'initiative Farm, qui est une déclinaison opérationnelle de la Global Alliance proposée par la présidence allemande du G7, endossée par les conclusions du Conseil du 24 mars dernier. Grande priorité aussi de l'Union européenne et française, la Grande Muraille Verte, pour le renforcement des capacités de production de protéines végétales dans les pays sahéliens et voisins. Je pourrais citer aussi des initiatives dédiées au climat, au développement des capacités de génération d'énergie renouvelable, à l'adaptation et à la résilience climatique en Afrique. Et de même pour le développement humain, plusieurs initiatives en matière de formation professionnelle, renforcement des systèmes éducatifs. Et puis pour le commerce, je dirais aussi le soutien à la zone de libre-échange continentale africaine, la SDCAF. Et à cet égard, je pense qu'il y a un point tout à fait clé qui a été mis en avant par Madame l'ambassadrice, c'est la nécessité de développer des capacités endogènes pour les PMA. C'est un point qui nous apparaît crucial pour assurer leur reclassement durable hors de la catégorie. Par l'objectif, c'est bien cela, c'est de faire sortir à des pays de cette catégorie, des pays les moins avancés. Et le renforcement des capacités, c'est un préalable nécessaire pour tirer l'entier bénéfice des dispositifs préférentiels existants. Voilà, donc renforcement des capacités absolument clé. Ça fait partie des éléments, Alexei, que vous mettez en avant. Je voudrais simplement dire qu'il y a vraiment une grande convergence de vues par rapport aux recommandations que vous nous faites. Et donc c'est heureux qu'il y ait une forme de cohérence entre les conclusions qu'on a pu adopter et les travaux de réflexion que vous avez lancés. Mais effectivement, on se situe dans le cadre d'une politique européenne de développement rénové, avec de profonds changements en cours, et un enjeu très clair pour l'Union européenne, qui est celui de renforcer sa visibilité et de renforcer ses partenariats. Et donc, à cet égard, nous, on est pleinement en phase avec l'agenda de la commissaire Urpilainen. On souhaite désormais passer à la vitesse supérieure dans la mise en œuvre de l'instrument NDICI et aussi du Fonds européen pour le développement durable élargi, le FEDD+, IFSD+, sachant qu'on pense vraiment qu'il y aura besoin d'un accompagnement en termes d'assistance technique pour les PMA, pour qu'ils puissent pleinement bénéficier de ces instruments financiers qui sont sophistiqués. Il ne faut pas qu'ils soient tenus à l'écart de ces instruments. Voilà, je m'en tiens là et pardon parce que j'ai repris une seconde fois la parole. Merci beaucoup.
Merci à vous, Monsieur Chevaillier. Oui, je crois que le point ici des ambitions, des outils, aussi du changement d'échelle de l'action européenne est bien acté, soutenu. Le point principal aujourd'hui et dans l'urgence, c'est la mise en œuvre de ces ambitions, et notamment des initiatives Équipe Europe dont vous avez fait mention. I'd like maybe now to turn to our other panelists. And San, I saw you raise the hand, but if you don't mind, I'll give you the floor later. Izabella from Cordaid.
Hello.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes, very
Hello.
well.
Good afternoon, everybody, and it's an honor to be here. I didn't think I'm already on. So I have thank you very much for inviting me to inviting Concord for this very important debate. I'm Izabella Toth. I work for Cordaid, which is a Dutch-based internationally operating NGO based in the Netherlands. I'm representing Concord here, but just to know that in Cordaid, Cordaid is focusing on what we call working in and on fragility, and 80% of our work is focused on combating poverty and inequality and in fragile and conflict-affected states. So this is why I'm here today. So thank you for the invitation. I have heard so many things that I already, of course, I wanted to frame the debate, but I will share some of the thoughts that I prepared. So basically, I understand that there is not a new policy for LDCs. Fair enough. There have been so many policies already, and there is so much on paper already. What will make it that this time it will be implemented and accelerated, and in which way? And what will make it that this time will actually succeed, you know, and who are the main, the essential, the who and the what and the how in order to make it possible. So of course, as everybody already said, the international context, we just barely start to stepping out of the pandemic with detrimental socioeconomic effects worldwide, and just start to realize the impact of the ongoing war in Ukraine. We feel it here also, but foremost in Africa, for instance, food security and food prices. Just look at the Horn at the moment. It places us in front of fact that needs strong leadership decisions and actions if we collectively still claim that we want to achieve Agenda 2030. The next point is one of my essential points from the short expose. COVID and now the war in Ukraine have exposed our global shared vulnerability. So it's not about the multidimensionality of vulnerabilities in LDC only. We are all vulnerable in different ways to emerging challenges. And we have the collective moral responsibility to deal with them in a coherent manner. And the EU, and I'm coming now to the EU, has the collective leverage and the power to actually support this consistently and for the longer term. You know, the EU, I really see like an actor who can do that. So regarding LDCs, tackling the many drivers or deep-rooted challenges require visionary as well as inclusive governance structures that will ensure fair and sustainable allocation of limited resources, whilst also holding actors, public, private, civil society, accountable for building together a more sustainable future for all of us. So what Philippe, what you said on the partnership and on making it happening together, that is also one of my main messages. So against the complex and complicating background, and having taken note, I read the Council conclusions of May 20th. A few highlights as going forward. Fully agree with one size does not fit all. LDCs, diverse group, on top of that 71% in sub-Saharan Africa. I don't want to talk about fragile states, but this calls for a recognition of indeed multidimensional nature of challenges and the key role of integrated and sustainable approaches, also in LDC, and adequate resourcing of that. What I find always complicating in day-to-day work, that there is, at least in CSO world, but also in international community, donor community world, a kind of compartmentalization. You know, least developed, least that, it's then humanitarian aid or something like that, you know, for the short term. No, there as well, it is absolutely possible to think long term, but then you have to, you know, to do like Paul Collier said, like, what to do there, we don't know, but we will do it anyway. So that is really the courage that we need to take up together. Second point is supporting local ownership and localization is paramount. This includes building resilience and strengthening national systems. Vulnerable populations pay often the highest price for basic services and food, health, education, water, energy. They must deal with consequences of fair governance structures that do not support basic rights. But despite the uphill struggle that these people face, the strength and resilience and resourcefulness remain the primary power for change. So to remind us, to bring us back that behind all the policies and whatever we do is that person who has the right to a better life. So in that sense, there is the resourcefulness of the people makes our common work possible and fosters innovation. So then what is needed, and the EU can support that because of its power and leverage, is continued support so that actors, legitimate local actors, particularly those most at risk, have the necessary space, power, resources, and capacities to contribute and lead on decisions and actions that touch them. This inclusive approach has the potential to lead to inclusive and sustainable recovery and development also in LDC. Combating shrinking space is essential. for civic space is essential for a truly inclusive local development. And again, the EU has the power to support that in a consistent manner. A third point is reducing inequalities, really one of the most critical challenges in relation to LDC. Public resources to achieve equality need to be at the center of coordinated response capable of addressing disproportionate socioeconomic impacts. Especially because crises always have a stronger impact on the most marginalized and underserved peoples and communities. I'm coming to my fourth point. I don't have too many. It's resourcing it. It's about, yes, modality, grant-based financing remains crucial. But then, you know, the quality of the money, is it good? I was thinking the good, the bad, and the ugly. Well, is this the good money? What is good money? The good money is what supports the good things, the right things at the right moment. For instance, I welcomed in the council conclusions the renewed engagement plan to support human capital development. You know, investing in individuals from the cradle to the grave, as you know, as the World Bank also said it, in a sustainable and equitable manner, access to timely and quality education, health services, or social protection. Therefore, in LDCs, EU ODA, European Union ODA, should particularly focus on supporting these sectors, focusing also on gender equality and the achievement of related NDICI targets. As these sectors should not be resourced through parallel private sector initiatives who demonstrably enhance the divide in access between the haves and have-nots. This is some point that probably not everybody will be on the same page, but we have seen examples of this. But then the big question is, I heard colleagues say on the online saying that yes, there is the 0.15, 0.20% GNI for LDCs, that is the dedicated target. How to secure the availability of this money? It has to stay on the agenda because COVID has redirected ODA, and now the war in Ukraine, we see it in Europe, has a major effect on available ODA, as member states commit extra allocations for in-country refugee costs. For instance, the Netherlands allocates in 22 an extra 220 million euros on top of the already allocated 350 to 400 million for this purpose. Secondly, increase in expenditure on defense will lead to less expenditure on ODA. And last but not least, you have seen also, unfortunately, what happened with Sweden, and I'm afraid that others will follow, redirect funding from developing countries, including LCCs. Sweden redrew 70% of its ODA funding to Burkina Faso due to the war in Ukraine. So then the question is, and I don't have an answer yet, how does this rhyme with the absolute necessity not only to keep the 0.15 or 20%, but to massively scale the ODA available for LDCs to support partner countries to meet the actual needs of the whole population? And then I have a lot of good things to say about the role of investment and support of inclusive economic development, but I'm sure I will not say anything new on that. Last but not least, let me emphasize I also included, to make this work, we need coherent policies and consistency in practices. So next to policy coherence, consistency in doing it. So for Concord, this means to foster synergies across policy areas and between sectors. In LDCs, think of this intersectionality, like trade, climate, conflict, just to name one. 2, to ensure today's policies do not undermine the well-being of sustainable development of future generations. And 3, to identify and address trade-offs or negative spillovers. The development aims in LDCs are also interlinked and integrated and set objectives in the EU's renewed engagement strategy that cannot be achieved in isolation. Actions on one objective can have positive or negative impacts in other areas. It is essential to respect the interlinkages between the sectors and between internal and external dimensions, addressing the root causes and focusing on a long-term vision and overall system change, also in LDCs. It's not only for a quick win for tomorrow, but also what happens in 10 years. As a conclusion, it looks good, intention is clear, foreseen task division can be done. So what's going to make it happen this time? And then finally, allow me to reiterate the commitment of us as CSOs and Concord in particular to continue the conversation and collaboration with all stakeholders, be it in Brussels, Paris, or in Yaoundé or Dakar. Thank you.
Thank you, Izabella. I might actually even adding New York to the mix of the places where discussions should
Sorry,
take place.
I will include it.
But that's a great
correct.
transition for me. And actually, I would like now, because you mentioned and you did emphasize the importance of finance and resources and the money, insisting on the public and the commitments and ODA commitments. But I think another important aspect and where the EU is also looking at is how to leverage development finance from other actors and through its new instruments, the EFSD Plus and others, to do that. And for that, I think, Laura, from your perspective, your experience working on those issues precisely on blended finance, not at the level of the EU, but at the level of the UN Capital Development Fund, this is really the bread and butter of what you do. And maybe we'd be very keen to hear from you on your insights and maybe some recommendations on how the EU could approach that to ensure that there's sufficient funding, and we know the amounts are huge for LDCs.
Thank you so much, Alexei. Thank you very much to everyone for having me here today. So the UN Capital Development Fund is the UN flagship catalytic financing agency for the LDCs. And we're a hybrid between a development finance institution and a development assistance organization. So within that, we're able to use our direct capital deployment of grants, loans, and guarantees, in addition to financial advisory, and combine that with non-financial development expertise and assistance that we provide to build capacities and strengthen enabling environments for the development then of financing mechanisms, systems, and markets. We do focus first and foremost on the LDCs as well. That's in our mandate. So we have a presence on the ground in 31 of the 46 LDCs, and that is growing every year. So, you know, in line, we really have taken the Doha Program of Action as sort of our guiding light for the next 10 years. And we had the advantage of creating our new strategic framework during the last year when the Doha Program of Action was also being negotiated and written. And so we really think that, you know, it is very in line, we found, with actually the report recommendations and the EU Council conclusions in terms of these are the strategic priorities that the LDCs themselves have articulated. And this is where they have said that they have, you know, country needs, and that's what we're looking to respond to now. And so we, of course, encourage the EU to continue to tailor their support towards these priorities as well. We, like others have said, are very much looking forward to part 2 of the LDC5 conference that will take place in March of next year. And one thing to think very concretely about, you have 10 months, I guess, looking at the calendar. What is the EU going to announce and, more importantly, implement in terms of concrete deliverables for the Doha Program of Action? So you have 10 months to figure it out, but wouldn't it be great if you already had some results to show, or you already said we were already implementing XYZ, and that's at the EU level, but also for each of the bilateral donors individually? What is it concretely that you're going to be able to say, we showed up and this is what we're doing? And that's what we as UNCDF are also trying to make sure that we have. And that's a lot of what we do is in partnerships with others, and that can be, again, bilateral organizations, private sector, financial service providers, local domestic banks. And we are indeed actually also working with the EU and hopefully doing some implementation of the new financial instruments on the ground, something that I know Philippe mentioned, that these instruments need to be, or maybe it was Luc, but in any case, they need to be instrumented, you know, with a guided process that really has some constraints around it, and make sure. And so we're in process of finalizing our pillar assessment to be able to implement some of those projects on the ground. So in reading the report recommendations and then the EU Council conclusions, there were a few points that really resonated with what UNCDF does. And there's sort of just 3 strings that I sort of want to put through all of my points, which are the need for a tailored approach, which has already, of course, been discussed and really being context specific, the need to address and mitigate risk, and then the need to scale. So these are all in line with what we're trying to do. As you said, Alexei is really trying to be a catalytic in what we're doing and mobilizing additional finance to be available. And then the recommendations were also in line with some of the policy analysis and theory of change analysis that we've done as an organization. So I was very pleased to see, for example, in the development finance section of the report, particularly in the adapting the EU's financial instruments to specific needs section, a lot of the recommendations specifically around blended finance are very much in line with the report that we published in 2020 with the OECD on how to scale blended finance in the LDCs. And I see Sana is smiling. And you also referenced then a forthcoming report from the OECD that's being developed for the Indonesian presidency of the G20, looking at the development working group and figuring out, again, how can we scale blended finance in the LDCs. So I think what's there is the same recommendations have now been put forth for the last 3 years. And so it sort of seemed more or less, right? So we've kind of coalesced around the need to support, the systems, the market development, the ecosystem, really getting the key components of an ecosystem in place to address the underlying constraints. We have agreed that for the need to aggregate, that individual ticket sizes are too small in these markets, and there needs to be more of a portfolio approach to these use of these instruments to help, scale, but also, will then aggregate across multiple LDCs, across sectors, and help diversify the risk. And so some of those things are coming up and continuing to resonate. And those, again, I think are great recommendations for the EU to take on, to think about how do they implement a portfolio approach in this? What partners can they work with that have existing vehicles or funds that are out there already, and there are many, that they can then piggyback on or work with or complement or scale up. And I think that this is something that we're trying to do as well. So in the DPOA, you have language in the section on mobilizing international solidarity and reinvigorating global partnerships and innovative tools. And this talks all about the need for innovative finance, blended finance, leveraging, predictable finance. And this includes expanding ODA, but also really making sure that the flexible financing is provided that can be used as first loss, concessional, or de-risking capital. And so in this vein, we provide concessional loans and guarantees directly from our balance sheet for SDG positive businesses, financial service providers, and small infrastructure projects. So this is called the Bridge Facility. It can go from fully concessional across commercial through the investment continuum. And the advantage of working in the way that we do is, since we also provide grants, we can help sort of build the capacity of these organizations, provide seed funding, provide technical assistance. But then the Bridge Facility provides a ticket size that ranges from about $100,000 to $500,000, which is really a missing size that we find. That it's really, we call it the missing middle, where it's too big for sort of aimed for like families and grant finance, but these transactions are still considered too small or risky for commercial investors. They often do not have the collateral they need to even get a loan from a domestic bank. And so we're able to provide across this investment continuum and then continue to work with other partners as these companies continue to scale up. So there we've helped to set up 2 different blended finance structures that are managed by third-party fund managers. The Build Fund, which is managed by Bamboo, which focuses on SME investments, and the International Municipal Finance Fund, which is managed by Meridium, which focuses on small climate resilient infrastructure projects. So again, this then pushes even more towards commercial viability. And we have a track record of investing along this continuum. And there's many examples, and it's really interesting the way that sort of patchworks together in terms of we do some of the pipeline development. We're working with the enabling environment, making some regulatory and framework reforms when necessary, working with these companies in early days, providing just pure grant financing. Then as they need maybe the bridge financing between $100,000 to $500,000, then maybe they can get a loan from the Build Fund as they need a larger term investment and onwards. And then we've also seen that some of them are able to get financing from local commercial banks thanks to the credit history and payback record that they then have from the loan that they've received from us. So just the one thing to highlight here is, and again, we are working with the EU and implementing some of their financing tools within all of these financing tools as well. But it's really to look at what additional flexible financing can be provided to existing mechanisms that are there. This was something that came out very strongly during the negotiation of the Doha Program of Action. Member states did not want to commit to setting up new funds, new facilities, new initiatives, which I agree with. But so what's out there that is working that the EU could help to scale? Who is already on the ground implementing in these ways, as we are, as many other excellent partners are as well, that can then push this to scale? And that's something that we're really looking at as well, of who can we work with in the UN system, but also across other partners. Who can we get the pipeline from, right? Because we're very unique in the UN system that we can provide loans and guarantees, but we have many great examples where maybe UN Women had an accelerator program where they were providing grants. And then now those companies, as they get out of the accelerator program, they need some working capital. Where can they get that from? And we're there to step in. So we have a great partnership with other UN entities to then continue to push these companies through the growth process. So we need to scale what's already working. This is then also in mind with, because of the concessional nature of the funding instruments that we have, we're able to take on a much greater scale of risk. And we do have lower expectations on the leveraging ratio, which is something that I noticed as well came out in the report. And I agree with fully as well, in the LDCs, you're not going to probably get the 10-to-1 leverage ratio in your first investment. If you get 1-to-1 in some of these markets, that might be considered as a success. And so be realistic about what type of impact are you trying to achieve. The one other sort of thing I wanted to pick up from the report was then on climate adaptation and building resilience. And I know that this is very important and very sort of topical right now as well. And again, the Doha Program of Action also refers to the high importance of building resilience of LDCs through stepped up capacity building, finance for adaptation to climate change. And again, here, the Doha Program of Action actually mentions the facility that we are implementing called LOCAL, which is the Local Climate Adaptive Living Facility. And this works directly with local governments, so really at the municipal and subnational level, to cope with the increased costs of building climate change resilience and sustainable adaptation to natural disasters. So we do regulatory work, we do capacity development, we help them access vertical funds, we help governments get accredited to access the Green Climate Fund, we help them do technical and planning of their local development process to figure out how are they going to use the land? What drainage and water management processes do they need to have in place? So again, in line with the recommendations from the report, I just think more consideration needs to be given to this climate adaptation, both in terms of the funding and the capacity building. And again, I would say, how can the EU look to scale up existing programs, help reduce some of the risk for the needs for these investments, and really take, again, this tailored approach where we've talked a little bit already today about really going to the local level, as this program does, and that's where this climate adaptation is really taking place, particularly when you look at the need for local climate smart infrastructure. And so how can local actors really be empowered to work on that?
Thanks, Laura. There's a lot to take in there, and probably a lot more you could say. Conscious of time, and also the fact that we still have one speaker, Tiina, who hasn't expressed herself and maybe shared her experience and involvement in the negotiation, also looking at the trade aspects. I noticed also, Izabella, you had a reaction to that. So we'll give the floor right away to Tiina, maybe to share your views and how you see that from where you sit in New York, in the delegation.
Thanks a lot, Alexei, and thank you for inviting me to this conversation. I think it's been absolutely fascinating so far, and I have jotted down several questions for the other panelists, which I think wasn't the objective as such. But I will, mindful of time, I'll try to be brief and just pass a few kind of high-level messages from the perspective where I sit, maybe focusing on the two questions that you put to me, which is, the first one was, why should the EU renew its partnership LDCs. And I think several speakers have alluded to it. We all know it. We all live it. Many of us feel the impacts in our daily work. We have this post-COVID environment where we now have a big black cloud, which is the aggression on Ukraine, and the impact it's having on the developing world, on the world globally, food security not being the least of these issues that we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis now. I won't dwell on that as such. I just want to kind of mention that as the overall caveat. I'm sure that a year from now, we will be discussing what is the impact on LDC graduation. So I see it percolating into every single conversation, including what the situation of LDCs. So just to put that out there. A second framing maybe point I have to that question of why the EU should renew its partnership is one that I think Philippe quite exhaustively already outlined, which is that we have a new context. As the EU, our responsibility in this moment of change to engage with the LDC partners individually and in the regional relationships we have, but also as a group at global level, to ensure that they fully grasp what this new reality, the new paradigm for the EU is, and that we meet somewhere to know that they understand and we understand their challenges. And I think Laura's was a good example of opportunities that are out there, but then we have to work on that last mile to make sure that also the LDCs are able to benefit from innovative opportunities, especially on the financing side. So that's maybe a second layer in that new moment for the EU, time to engage with the LDCs. And from the perspective that where I sit, which is this multilateral context, I would also frame it as part of the EU's stated commitment to multilateralism and the 2030 agenda, and most of all, the principle that we leave no one behind. So kind of to backtrack on those three framing points of the situation of COVID and Ukraine, the new moment in EU development cooperation kind of paradigm, and our very stated, very strong priority to support the multilateral system. The LDC group as a whole is this group that is the least, is the most furthest behind. So they should be, by that argument, they should be our first priority. Second of all, it's an opportune time, not just because of the EU new context, but also we now have the recently adopted Doha Program of Action. It's a politically opportune time to engage. And of course, the dramatic situation on food security and other impacts of Ukraine make this not only necessary, but all the more urgent. So we compound COVID with that. So this was also kind of a high headline level way of saying that it's now is the time, it's urgent, and we need to do this. Then on the second question that you've put to me, and what the EU should do more, do less, do differently in its support and cooperation. And again, I think Philippe has exhaustively kind of opened the box on EU instruments, and as a European, but also having interfaced internationally with the LDCs and the multilateral system, I would, I don't think I'm completely subjective to say that the EU instruments are some of the best in class, best in show in terms of supporting LDCs. And so starting with the human-centric approach that we have, treating each country as an individual country with its own challenges and context, I think doing more or less or differently means more about connecting the dots, kind of lubricating the implementation into reality, and it'll be about the final fit, really, to make sure that we serve the people of the LDCs, the SMEs, the women, the youth, children in a way that makes a difference in their lives. So Again, Philippe and Brussels' perspective, I think, is more kind of able to comment on what we should do more or less in relation to our instruments. My own perspective from the New York angle is one that focuses maybe on what I've been most engaged with recently, which is the Doha Program of Action. And there I have 3 points to leave you with in terms of what the EU could and should maybe do in relation to the Program of Action. And I think there's 3 ways of thinking about this document, Program of Action, which is it's a 345 paragraphs. I think Susanna might correct me, but it's a big document. It's not always terribly operational as such, but I see great value in it in 3 ways. The first one being that we, the EU, meaning EU Commission, but EU member states, EU as a team Europe, we need to help to operationalize this program of action as a platform to engage multilaterally and bring attention to the LDCs' needs and challenges. And I think we're well placed to do that. We have a long-standing relationship working with the LDCs, but also other actors. And by this, I mean civil society, private sector, and UN agencies, not least. And I think we have a responsibility due to our historic role there and an opportunity as well to make sure that it becomes a platform of kind of peer pressure, of sharing best practices, showcasing what the EU does in terms of, maybe this kind of activity could be duplicated elsewhere. And I share Laura's call for action for the March conference. We have the program of action in place now, so we can focus this conference on deepening partnership, on launching projects, on announcing. We can focus on real implementation issues rather than gabbling a document, which is essentially now done. So the disappointment of having to disconnect those may turn out to be, something that we can make use of to do something just above and beyond adoption of a program. So here, I think the kind of buzzwords, if you will, is multi-stakeholder, multilateral, leaving no one behind, and the visibility of the LDC needs and action from that perspective. The second, just trying to wrap up here, the second point is that, as I said, the document is quite exhaustive and long, but it also provides then a multitude of hooks for concrete action. There are so many things that can and should be implemented that it's a good starting basis at international level to engage with many partners and come together on priority issues and maybe identify where joint priorities. I think someone mentioned that this is what the LDCs want. I think that's maybe underestimating what this document is. It's what the LDCs want, but what we have as a community agreed that these are issues that should be addressed. So there's a certain buy-in a priori to things that are in the document. Priority setting needs to happen, but nevertheless, it's there. And then to close maybe on a last point, which I want to make sure that I'm not communicating what I mean by this. And the third point is that the EU should hold the LDCs accountable for the commitments that they have taken in the DPOA. And I don't want to say that it's a two-way street. It's not a two-way street because we're heading towards the same objective. But maybe it's a street that has several lanes, and there's a lane that the partners are responsible for supporting LDCs, but there's also a lane where the LDCs have their own ownership and their own responsibility in terms of driving national agendas. And while we accompany them, this is also something that it has to come from the national ownership. And this kind of platforms avoids it becoming, a conditionality or a transactionality. It's more about a joint responsibility, which we can then hold each other accountable for in the spirit of having a joint objective. So I had some points also on trade. I don't know if you want me to make some points on the trade angle, or maybe I stop there for now.
At this stage, thanks a lot. We are actually already running out of time, and maybe just one point. I would just like to thank our interpreter, who has been doing a great job, and free him as of now if if he wants to stop the interpretation. I'm sorry for the French speaking or those who are listening in French. Monsieur Chevaillier, les règles sont assez strictes concernant les interprétations. So if you don't mind, and if you have a bit of time, maybe a few minutes, I picked up that there were some reactions. I would like to maybe to give the floor to each one of you to maybe react with some comments or questions that we might not be able to answer right now, but I think it's good to have them here. I noticed that Izabella, you had your hand raised also earlier, but maybe just give a last round, and possibly each one of you to react.
Yes, can I?
Please.
Oh, thank you. It's just I was wondering. I wanted to just compliment on what Laura Senett said, that if I was to represent my own organization, I actually contributed to the UNCDF blending in fragile states paper of 2019, I believe, and with the OECD DAC as well. So I totally recognize the points that you're mentioning. I was a bit surprised that the UN itself, the UNCDF itself, is developing these kind of instruments. So it would be because some of the organizations and the impact investors from not for profit impact investors have been in this line of business for the past decade, if not more. San would remember all the discussions with the European Commission about the options for supporting the missing middle. So why am I saying this is that it is needed, it is urgent, and it needs to be accelerated, and it is not only the responsibility of the UN or the EU, but also ourselves, and to see how we can reinforce each other in this, because it is a very good aim. It's very difficult to implement it without. It's not only the risking, but those who want to take the risk. They're not there anymore. So that is something that we can take up in another discussion.
In the discussion where we talk about the implementation. Thanks a lot for staying here. I would just, before we close this, and I'm sorry, we had one question from Vince Chadwick related more specifically to the TEIs and the EFSD Plus and how they are actually targeting and responding to the needs of LDCs in particular. Maybe, I don't know if Philippe, you want to take that one, but maybe we'll start in the same order. Maybe Ambassador Jaiteh, is there any points you would like to react upon from the very rich discussion and intense points that were raised?
Indeed, Alexei, I just want to thank all my fellow panelists for the very, very good and very rich discussions and presentations that they have provided us this afternoon. Just to pick on one or two things, I think Laura mentioned the issue of scaling up. And I just wanted to flag it out there that in as much as we're looking at policies and programs and we're looking at a new framework, there are some very good initiatives on the ground that we need to build on and replicate. And she mentioned particularly the local, which is being implemented by UNCDF in Gambia at grassroots level and helping especially women and youth to deal with resilience and mitigation. And also the EU, is it the Youth Empowerment Project, trust fund initiative. These are initiatives that are very good, have high impact on the ground, and can benefit from replication and scaling up. I just want to thank you also for the very good discuss that we have. I've taken a lot of notes, very useful, and this is one of the issues that can bring capacity enhancement to some of us. And it will be good that if some of our partners, even at country level, are able to tune into such webinars and participate and in discussions and dialogues that are happening here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Jaiteh. I'm now turning to Philippe.
Thanks, Alexei. Thanks to all. Just quickly, because there were actually a lot of issues, and I think a lot of points I took note of. On the urgency and on the response, agree with a lot of the points that were made. Indeed, in terms of the impact on LDCs or what's happening because of the war in Ukraine. And this is indeed rightly an effort that targets both emergency, humanitarian, let's say solidarity in the short run, but at the same time built-in resilience, trade-related issues when we're talking about agriculture normally, and longer-term systemic issues. And I think the challenge is indeed to tackle all those elements in one go. On TEI, I haven't seen, but indeed, I think as I mentioned, LDCs are fully involved. I mean, de facto in our programming, in our Team Europe effort with member states. So we do Team Europe initiative in LDCs, as I mentioned earlier, when they're national. And obviously, when we have regional Team Europe initiatives, they're de facto involved. I mean, there's no regional Team Europe initiative in Africa that de facto doesn't involve LDCs, given the situation of countries in Africa. And maybe also to be into what Laura was also saying, yes, agree. I mean, talking about steer, policy steer and impact and scale, I mean, this is also what we're doing exactly at this point. Impact and scale is exactly why we're working with member states, so that together we actually have more impact and more scale into what we bring together in terms of resources. And in terms of policy steer and EFSD plus, again, when we're looking at, and that's currently ongoing with the call for proposals and so forth, in terms of EFSD plus rolling out and guarantees, this is to serve the policy priorities jointly agreed in the multi-annual indicative programs that we've signed with the Gambia, with other partners in the world. So the objective of what eventually will take place through EFSD plus and guarantees is steered by let's say the political content of a joint document we've agreed with our partner countries that define where the investment should be going. And that's the current challenge. So yes, there is steer, and yes, indeed, and notably because we try to work as much as possible with member states, we're looking for impact and scale by bringing Team Europe together. Those were the few, I mean, I think there's a lot on coherence, also a lot of points that were raised are relevant, and I think I flagged in my presentation, which is a constant issues when we also need to get involved in other discussions that we don't necessarily lead in terms of portfolio, but I certainly share that point. Thanks, Alexei.
Thank you, Philippe. Izabella, you had a question or reaction to what was said.
No, I spoke enough. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be with you, and I hope we can keep connected. Thank you.
That will be followed up. And Laura, I mean, there was a question to you, and I think also the aspect that, again, in the chat, the question of to what extent blended and development finance does respond and is adapted to the needs and specificities of LDCs. We understand the TEIs are also or concern LDCs, but there's probably a need to do more, and maybe in certain sectors, and human development was mentioned here, for instance. So that's one of the remaining challenge, I think, moving forwards.
I'll respond in 2 sentences. This is an ongoing debate about how relevant blended finance is in LDCs. I do think there's a space for it. It's not a silver bullet. It has to be used correctly. But one thing we advocate for is including blended finance very concretely in financing plans. So whether that's the National Development Plan or the INFFs, which are being developed right now, and seeing how can that be incorporated as one of the many tools that can be used to help finance the development objectives of a particular country. Thanks.
Okay. Tiina, I don't know if you have anything left to say, maybe one word before I give the floor to Luc, if he is still
Not at all. Thank you to everyone for their
Thank you
insightful.
very much. Apologies for running over time. Luc Chevaillier, si vous êtes encore parmi nous, avec plaisir, quelques mots de conclusion. Alors, hélas, on n'a plus l'interprétation. I don't know if our other panelists can understand French, mais vous avez la possibilité, si vous voulez, de dire quelques mots de conclusion.
Yes, I can speak in English. But anyway, there many thanks because it was a pleasure for me to speak French, and it's an instruction from my minister. So anyway, just to say in a word that we need collectively to accelerate, and the EU and its member states need to change our working methods. And I think we are quite conscious and ready to move forward internally and also with our partners. Internally, we need to play as a real team, and it's the Team Europe approach is has to be not only a slogan, but we need now to be very effective on the ground and coordinated. And then with our partners, just listen. We need to listen to them and their needs. And I have to say that we have to also look to the competition, to emerging donors, emerging actors. I have in mind China, but other actors too. We are committed to promote the EU values, the EU development model, and the SDGs 2030 agenda. Once again, we are talking about our times of crisis, so we need to do more. And it was, I think, a very good discussion. And thanks again, Alexei, for organizing this meeting. And I'm ready to just keep in touch and think about solutions with our partners from the EU and UN, and also NGOs and our partners such as Gambia. So thanks again, and see you hopefully in real, because this year conference is fine, but 2 years after the COVID crisis, I hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot, Luc. Thanks to all. Hopefully we will indeed continue the discussion, maybe not in such a broad and addressing so many issues, and hopefully this is still on the agenda, and we'll have other opportunities in the future. ECDPM will remain engaged on many of the topics we touched upon today, so I'm sure there'll be other opportunities to continue the discussion in different formats, and hopefully in person. Thanks a lot for your participation. And yeah, let's keep in touch.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And
bye.
Bye.